So after we've seen this plan develop, after we've seen God do something remarkable through the people of Israel, it says in verse 29 of Joshua chapter 8, Joshua impaled the king of Ai on a sharpened pole and left him there until evening. At sunset, the Israelites took down the body as Joshua commanded and threw it in front of the town gate. They piled a great heap of stones over him that can still be seen today. And this is the New Living Translation. It's one of these phrases that is sometimes hard to translate. However one translates it, Ai's king did not end well. He died in probably a fairly gruesome manner. His body was left on display as a warning, perhaps, of what happens to people who say no to God, who go their own way and don't go God's way. And for us today, of course, we read that and we think, well, that's just horrific. That has no place in God's word. And yet here it is. And what do we do with that? The truth is that there are deadly consequences sometimes and a price to pay for thumbing our nose at God. And today for us, when we go our own way, do our own thing, the price to pay may be a disquiet in our heart. It may be a lack of God's abundant blessing in our lives. It may be a broken relationship. We are unlikely to be impaled on a sharpened pole and left there until evening, thankfully. And yet the reality is that God still wants to have relationship with his children today. That means that the things that are important to God are important to us. See, Ai and the king and the people in that city, as in many of these Canaanite cities that the people of Israel conquered, and they overcame these people, they lived in ways that were diametrically opposed to the ways and purposes of God. And what happens in the book of Joshua, in the book of Judges, and some other parts of the historical narrative of the Old Testament brings up a number of questions that we can look at outside the scope of this podcast, but they are important questions for us to answer. So it's evident to the people of the time that the fact that a king was executed in such a way and his body left on display was really no big deal to the readers and writers. Life was cheap, no doubt, and people died all the time. And to us, reading this with our modern sensibilities, we kind of recoil and think, how terrible. But perhaps part of the heart of God in all of this is for us to realize that there is a price to pay when we go our own way. And as believers, of course, followers of Jesus, we understand that the price for our sin has been paid already by Jesus. And he wasn't impaled on a sharpened pole, but he allowed his body to be nailed to a cross that was lifted up in a not dissimilar way. And people looked on him. It was a public execution so that people could take warning of those who opposed Roman rule and authority. But it was also for us to realize that actually Jesus took my place on that cross. And I'm not trying to read Jesus into every passage in the Old Testament. I'm not trying to do that at all. But it just occurred to me as I was reading this that God, he points out that the price to pay is significant. There are deadly consequences. And the truth is, there's a deadly consequence for the way I live my life. And that deadly consequence is being met by the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. So when Jesus died, it was so that I did not have to bear those deadly consequences. And for that, I'm profoundly thankful. And it's easy for us, I think, to go through our lives and think, well, we just carry on as we normally do. Life will go on, sirrah, sirrah. But a price is being paid. And we enter into a relationship with a God who loves us so incredibly much. And for that, I'm profoundly thankful.